Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Vishal Ganti. I'm a sophomore here at Colby. Our speaker this week is Jacqueline Alemany, a current White House correspondent for the Washington Post. She began her career at CBS, where she worked in various roles, most notably covering the 2016 presidential election in Iowa and New Hampshire. She then moved to the Washington Post in 2018, where she worked for early morning newsletters Early 202 and Power Up, covering domestic politics and general news. After that, she became the congressional correspondent for the Washington Post, where in 2022, she and her team won the Pulitzer Prize in Public Service for their thorough and truthful coverage of January 6th. After that, she became, most recently, the White House correspondent. Tonight, our moderators are Professor Carrie Levan of the Government Department and Cameron Rodriguez, a current sophomore here at Colby. So with that being said, please join me in welcoming our speaker tonight, Jacqueline Alemany.
Well, thank you, everyone. Ooh, listen to that. This is very fancy. I'm very excited to be here with all of you and to see so many of my students. So thank you guys for coming out tonight. And thank you especially to Jackie and to Cameron for being willing to moderate with me. So Jackie has joined us, had quite an adventure to get here, and has endured the weather that we have. So we're very lucky to have a DC insider to hopefully share some of her wisdom about what the heck is going on in our nation's capital right now. I know that a lot of you have some questions, and I certainly do as well. And so I'm going to start us off tonight with a question about the party that has majority power, right? The Republican Party, as everyone knows, right? They have unified control of the federal government. They control the House, they control the Senate, they control the White House. And it seems like on the surface, they have quite a lot of power. But, and there's a but, their majority is actually not that big, right? They only have, 3 seats in the House, maybe an opportunity to get 2 more. There's 2 vacancies, 3 seats in the Senate, right? And so my question is really about that coalition, right? They have to keep their coalition together to get anything done, and they can't afford to have any defectors, right? To get anything done, they have to hold all of the Republicans together. And so I'm kind of curious, what does it look like? What does that coalition look like on the ground in DC right now? Is it holding strong? Is there GOP unity? Or are there some points of conflict, maybe around some policy areas like government spending, or the war in Ukraine seems like maybe a point of contention. So what are you hearing, what are you seeing when those cameras are off? How's that coalition holding?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me and for all of you taking time out of your very busy week, especially Cameron is skipping practice for me, which I know is a very big deal. And if I'm shifting around uncomfortably, if I'm uncomfortable looking, it's not because I'm nervous, or hopefully not, but I'm 34 weeks pregnant, don't recommend it. And also if you hear a dog barking, that's also my dog, who we had a whole sitter snafu. Anyways, I'm here. Thank you again. So it's been so interesting watching the Republican Party and the rise of Trumpism since really 2015, from when I started covering the campaign trail in New Hampshire and really saw the rise of Trump from the New Hampshire primary, living on the ground in Manchester, to where we are now, and just how effective Trump has been in essentially forcing and shaping the party into the Trump party and the Make America Great Again party. He sort of, had his finger on the pulse of this populism from the Tea Party movement. Also, if I use any phrases that are confusing or sound a little like jargony or insidery, please just interrupt and ask me to explain it, because we in DC sometimes get a little sloppy about that. So taking sort of that populist grassroots movement from the Tea Party, and Trump really kind of found that, tapped into it, and I think now, over the past 8 years, has made that really the mainstream, this Make America Great Again mentality, America first. I wouldn't necessarily call him an isolationist, but because obviously, as you've seen, maybe, potentially, I hope you're not all reading the news all the time because it can be really overwhelming, but he has some expansionist ideas, from trying to annex Canada to Greenland to the Panama Canal, but anti-interventionist, expansionists, sort of hearkening back to pre-FDR pre-World War foreign policy. But he has really remade, I think, the Republican Party. And there were, after I think, the 2012 loss, that's when Republicans in DC started seeing this anti-globalist, anti-free trade sentiment really start to bubble up. And Trump really was the first person to run with that. But there was a cadre of Republican staffers in Washington who were already sort of working on these kinds of issues. And after his first presidential term, essentially Republicans spent the last 4 years really coalescing and professionalizing the party to actually try to better execute some of the Trumpist ideas that I think he might have floated during his first presidential administration but wasn't able to execute. And in turn, that really impacted a lot of the elections and the lawmakers that we've seen been able to survive and hold on to their seats in Congress. So that transition and that evolution has been pretty remarkable and very noticeable. I would say that we have really slim margins, but there is this general feeling of no one wants to be the odd man out here who is going to be facing a primary in 2026 and maybe singled out by Trump if they decide to go against his, one of many legislative priorities that he's trying to push through right now. In the House, at the end of the day, any Republican could serve as a Joe Manchin, essentially, someone who can completely gum up any plan and wield their power to get what they want, which is a very unusual situation for a House member to be in, because they're usually, they don't matter as much, but because of the margins, they have that power. But what we've seen so far, especially in the confirmation process and on the Senate side, is people are not sticking their necks out right now. And as a bunch of MAGA allies, sort of Trump's group of outside advisors and media liaisons and people who are sort of former Trump administration officials who now speak on his behalf and advise him, as they've all pointed out to my colleagues and I over the past few weeks, basically Trump's base and his grassroots supporter view getting Trump's agenda done as sort of like a religious mandate, that they treated the Senate confirmations and anyone who was going against Trump as someone who needed to be ousted from the party. And I think people have been surprised at the energy and have not wanted to face the wrath of voters. So we'll see how long that lasts.
Yeah. Well, I think that's super interesting. You mentioned how the Republican coalition is attempting to almost tighten up some of the Trumpist ideas. And I was wondering how you think Doge comes into effect with this. Obviously, I'm sure all of us are aware of Elon Musk owns Twitter, and then Tesla, you've probably seen his cars all over recently. But yeah, it's extremely unique to see a billionaire almost at the forefront of our government recently. He's been at the headlines of almost every news outlet, even in the interview that he did in the Oval Office, him standing, Trump sitting, that almost power dynamic. How do you think Doge in itself is affecting the Republican coalition, and do you think it's possibly making it weaker?
And not just a billionaire, but an unelected official who many people sort of refer to as the shadow president at this point. I think that Doge is actually the Department of Government Efficiency. It is Elon Musk's inside the government operation to expedite processes, streamline, and try to get rid of the federal bureaucracy that Trump supporters think prevented Trump from executing his agenda the first time around. But it is the one thing that I think Republicans, in theory, are unified on. There's always been this desire, especially amongst this group of fiscal hawks in the House and in the Senate, to make cuts, that the U.S. consistently goes over budget. We want to cut the deficit. We're spending too much. Let's try to haggle over the budget, especially the House Freedom Caucus, this other group of Republicans in the House that have also been very fiscally conservative and focused. This is the hill that they have always wanted to die on. And so they have welcomed Musk with open arms. But I think where there are discrepancies and fault lines showing up is when it comes to what is actually being cut. There is this whole populist group of Republicans who are against the industrial defense complex, who want all the cuts to be made at the Pentagon. We're not seeing that so far. There are a lot of Republicans who believe that actually we need to tap into Social Security and Medicaid and mandatory spending and make really hard cuts that are politically unpopular and have appeared so far to be a third rail with Donald Trump. And then there are the anti-interventionist Republicans who are in favor of cutting USAID, pulling out of the war in Ukraine, and having America reposition ourselves as, again, less interventionist. Going over to Europe, the Munich Security Conference, and J.D. Vance and a bunch of other Trump officials essentially telling Ukraine, we need something in return for our support, reparations, so to speak, and for future support, we also will need something, and basically saying we're not going to foot the bill anymore. So I think this is where you're going to start to see some pushback from Republicans on Trump, especially since Congress, at the end of the day, it's all about the power of the purse. That's their constitutional responsibility, their duty, and essentially right now what Trump and DOJ is doing is usurping them. And so I think as their constituents start to feel the pain for money that they have appropriated in their districts, Cynthia Lummis, for example, a senator from Wyoming, is very upset in particular about this one airport in Wyoming that is now no longer getting funding. A lot of Republican senators have these sort of obscure pet projects that are getting impacted now. That's when you're going to start seeing a little bit more pushback and people trying to rein in what DOJ is doing.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the Republicans and what they're doing and what's happening in the majority party. So what's the story with the Democrats? Like, what the heck are they up to? They are the minority party, but not a weak minority party. They're like half of the government practically. It does seem when Republicans are in the minority, they somehow know how to, use power to slow things down. I'm just thinking about Senator Tuberville from, Alabama, who one senator in the minority party prevents hundreds of military promotions from happening, right? So the Republicans are really good at being in the minority party, holding the line, and serving as a check on the majority party. From the outside right now, it doesn't look like the Democrats are doing a whole lot of anything. So what are you seeing in D.C.? What are you hearing? What is the Democratic Party up to? What is their plan to hold DOJ accountable, the executive accountable, and the majority party?
I think that I'm curious how Eugene might have handled a question similar to this, because he covered the Dems during the election much more closely than I did. But in terms of the congressional Democrats, I mean, they were not prepared for this. There is no cohesive strategy. There is Dem on Dem violence. There are people, just doing television hits to criticize one another on their media strategy. You have some lawmakers just calling Elon Musk a dick and thinking that's the way to go. And there is no agreement on the path forward right now. And there is also no de facto leader of the party. I think that there is a lot of resentment and lingering frustration about and toward Joe Biden and the way that he left the party, the way that he bowed out of the race too late, that he should have adhered to his original promise to drop out and pass the mantle to the next generation after a single term instead of allow what we all saw play out to happen, basically being forced out of the race, anointing a successor, and then having the shortest presidential campaign in modern history fail against someone that Democrats were just quite frankly not prepared to fight against. I think they underestimated just how ready to go and how professionalized the Trump operation had become over the past 4 years through groups like Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation, America First Policy. Again, all of these different think tanks that really took Trumpism to heart and tried to put it down on paper and create legal and policy strategies around their big ideas, around unitary power and executive power, and coalescing that and consolidating that power in the White House. And I think Dems are really used to playing by the rules. I think they're invested in a lot of litigation, but that moves slowly. Things move through the courts slowly. That can be something that works to people's benefit most of the time, but in a situation like this, it's obviously not great for Democratic strategy. So I don't know. I mean, they're as we like to say, they're in the wilderness.
Well, yeah. Well, we talk about strategy, right? And clearly, the Democrats might not be doing the best job as of right now. But I'm thinking about everyone here in this room, especially as students. And one of the ways I think, or unique ways that we're able to check power is through media, right? And obviously, as an investigative reporter, you play a large part in that. And I think one of the examples that comes to my mind is the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, and her exclusion of press just based off the mere fact that they weren't willing to call the now newly named Gulf of America the Gulf of Mexico, right? And I mean, something as little as that, and a change that happened, honestly, so quickly. How are you going to navigate, obviously, appeasing the Trump administration, because you have to in order to gain accurate information, but also be true to the American people and us here in this room and give us an accurate depiction of what's going on in the White House?
Yeah, this is as I was just telling you guys, this is a question that we are debating and trying to answer in real time, especially in our newsroom, about how best to stand up for the First Amendment, for the rights of the Associated Press, and simultaneously balance our commitment to our audience and our readers. I think there are a bunch of, people on X and pontificators and bloviators who have very strong opinions on what the media should be doing in response to this. In 2008, for example, this happened at one point with some sort of Treasury interview, and the mainstream media at the time, they all did a universal boycott, and it forced the Obama administration's hand, and they let someone into the interview. But that's just not the reality or the landscape we're living in anymore. And we need to be very clear-eyed about that. Parties don't need us anymore. They have their own media instruments and their own ways of communicating and meeting people where they are that they have far more control over than when they're working with us. I think this is where relationships and sort of having a solid foundation in DC can be really helpful. I'm all in favor of being sort of the outsider reporter, being someone who spends most of their time on the ground and doing, the shoe leather reporting. And but in an environment like this where you have developed trust with people over a number of years and have proven to be a good faith actor and someone who is fair and doesn't editorialize and really tries to stay in your lane, that is where you can sort of maintain this, you can balance the fine line of maintaining access and having open and candid conversations with people who might not normally want to be engaging with mainstream media, with also being able to give your readers an unvarnished and most accurate and most comprehensive view of what's going on. But it is something I think about, that we think about every day, every hour, every conversation, every story that we publish. I think it also is probably helpful just in terms of the conversation of understanding the way media works a little bit better, or at least how we do our jobs, because there's so much noise now, and because everyone is a media outlet. But we have a lot of hard and fast rules. We cannot publish something unless we have at least 2 sources. We always reach out to people for comments before we publish. Everyone always has the opportunity to weigh in and give their perspective. We have a no surprise policy, which means we don't publish things that we haven't run by the subject or the entity that we're writing about. And there are a lot of different people that are involved with a single newspaper article, even if it's like a quick daily, something that's not long form or investigative. So I think if we were a little bit better about sort of our news literacy strategy, and that's something that I think is on mainstream media outlets and legacy outlets to do better on, I think we could develop better relationships with our audience, and in turn show back to this administration and future administrations, why they need us in that regard.
Absolutely.
All right, so now we're going to turn to our audience. So I know we have a couple of students who are already ready.
Yes.
Right, Austin in the red, I remembered.
Hi, Jackie. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Austin. I'm a sophomore here at Colby. Veterans in our military are more likely to vote for Republicans and also be addicted to opioids. You've covered opioids some in your reporting, and I'm wondering if you've heard anything or if there's been anything done by this new White House to combat the opioid crisis, especially with recent cuts to NIH.
That's a great question, and thank you for doing your research. When I was in New Hampshire, I did a lot of coverage of the crisis on the ground, because New Hampshire also happened to be sort of ground zero for the opioid crisis. And then when I moved to Ohio for the general election, I also went to sort of the epicenter of where the Purdue pharma mills really originated from, Poolesville, Ohio. There's a lot of amazing books I would recommend later on about that. But I do think this is something Trump has campaigned on consistently for 8 years. He's taken a bit of a different approach to it than I think a traditional president would, but he has certainly raised awareness about it. During his first administration, he tried to cut the Office of National Drug Policy and Control, and it really backfired on him because it was in direct contradiction to his efforts and his pledge to fight the opioid crisis. He rolled back those cuts right away, ended up implementing a drug czar who tried to address the crisis. And then some of his first moves in this White House were signing executive orders that him and his advisors argued addressed the crisis by trying to stop fentanyl and other drugs from coming through the border. But there are, as you note, Austin, again, some contradictory policy decisions being made that undercut that goal, like by making cuts at NIH or cuts to doctors who might be able to support veterans at the VA department. All things that are happening right now at such a rapid clip. And because things are happening so fast, it's unclear whether or not the administration really realizes in its totality just how it might be impacting one policy issue. So it's something and I have a colleague, we have a colleague on our team, Dan Diamond. I recommend everyone follow him. He's been covering healthcare for basically his entire career, and now he's joined the White House team, and he also covers this issue really closely. And so it's definitely something we're going to need to follow up on and see. I mean, there was a person that he pardoned, Ross Ulbricht, I might be botching his last name, who a lot of people were up in arms about because they blamed him for helping and facilitating a lot of the fentanyl trafficking into the Midwest. So, it's a lot of this stuff has happened so quickly. We're all going to need to take a step back and kind of reassess and see how everything fits together and impacts the bigger picture in the months to come.
Yeah, and then
Michael, right
Michael,
here.
right?
Michael in the middle.
Hi, I'm Michael. I'm a senior. So Jeff Bezos is now the owner of the Washington Post. He's a billionaire. We have billionaires in Washington now. How should we, as non-billionaires, the American people, navigate trusting those people to be the main players in our government now?
Trust but verify. I mean, I think there's a lot of investigating to be done. That is why I think a free and independent press is so important. It's why you've seen the Washington Post investigate Bezos himself and try to dig into conflicts of interest from his various business entities. And it's why you've seen some people at the Washington Post resign over the past few months. Unfortunately, it's been a bit of a hard time. People who have felt like their ability to be a journalist has been compromised in some way. I personally have not felt that way. Neither has anyone on our White House team. And it is something we are all hyper aware of in the day-to-day work that we're doing. And there are a lot of resources across the board, not just at the Washington Post, but the Wall Street Journal, other billionaire-owned newspapers that are putting lots of resources towards trying to hold these billionaires in account, especially people like Musk, who are now directly involved with the government, have government interest, may or may not be impacting their bottom line in some way. But in terms of advice for you all, I would say, keep buying subscriptions. Try to be conscientious about where you spend your time, whose ads you're clicking on. I no longer have a Facebook. I haven't been on Instagram in 4 years. Not to be a condescending purist about it, but I think there are sort of small acts of protest isn't the right word, but just everyday things that you can do in your consumption and media habits to try to support what we're trying to do by holding them accountable.
I was kind of laughing because everyone who's in any of my classes knows that I always make jokes about, I know you guys aren't on Facebook, but if you live in Waterville, you have to be on Facebook because the city of Waterville runs on Facebook. Like there's literally, everyone needs to follow What's Up Waterville so that you know what the heck's going on in Waterville. But like every business.
Yeah.
But anyways, yes, all very good advice.
I'm also I'm like a privacy hawk too. So
Oh, no, I mean, it is.
it's a loaded decision that I made.
I mean, they don't even understand privacy because their parents put them on Facebook like their birth, like from the moment they were born. Like their sonogram was on Facebook.
That's
so.
good though, because you do need to get the Gmail handle you want
Yeah.
at birth, I think.
We actually did that with our kids. The second they were born, we booked them their Gmail handle, so they're set.
No, but I had a bunch of relatives who all canceled their Washington Post subscription during the drama
Yeah.
a few months ago when Bezos pulled the op-ed.
Right.
Which, by the way, I will say for the record, I think that op-ed pages are really confusing to readers. When we're talking about media literacy, it's really confusing to have an opinion column right next to a hard news column. And I do think it gives readers some reason to maybe distrust what a newspaper is trying to do. And I think in like a perfect world, I think it would be great to have a newspaper that has no opinion columns. Not that I don't love and have great relationships with some of our op-ed writers and I think what they write is thought-provoking, but I do think it can be really confusing. Now, do I think that pulling the op-ed at that time, that period of time, was a strategic misstep? I'm not going to say, but when I had relatives cancel their subscription, I was like, guys, you're hurting me. Cancel, if you want to protest against Jeff Bezos, cancel your Amazon Prime subscription. Like, let's be a little more thoughtful about this.
Yeah. All right, let's see if we have any more. Oh, we have a lot. Oh, dang. Okay. Let's go to the middle, and then we'll come to the front. No, I gotta be equitable. Okay, we'll go, yes, right there with the thumb. There you
Hi,
go.
thank you for coming. My name's Ismail. I'm a senior economics major, and I guess my question is kind of like, despite Trump's policy of isolationism, we kind of see a different opinion on kind of the conflict in Gaza, and it seems that the only thing that Democrats and Republicans can kind of agree on is their stance of what should be done in Gaza, kind of like still supporting Israel. So I guess, like, what does that conflict kind of look for, or like kind of necessitate in terms of like the future? Like, what will it hold in terms of, I guess, like, it's gonna sound bad, but like bargaining power in between like parties? Like, what will it be used for in the future by the different parties?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. That's definitely above my pay grade, and I think something that is a political and policy issue that will vex both parties. You've seen Trump sort of take his spaghetti on the wall approach by throwing out a few ideas that seem extremely unorthodox in the past few weeks about, wanting to develop the waterfront and put a bunch of hotels and make it the Riviera. What did he call it? The Riviera of the Middle East. I would say Trump and Biden are more aligned on the issue than other Democrats and Republicans. Biden was one of the only Democratic presidents who has been a self-described Zionist. They had similar policy interests. The Trump transition and the Biden administration worked together to try to bring things to a ceasefire and bring hostages home during the transition period. But in terms of the timing, it is really, I think, now in the Trump administration's hands to kind of unilaterally make a path forward for what is going to happen in Israel. And it's going to be hard because Democrats don't have any majority in Congress to appropriate anything or to stop arms deals or to really impact that conversation in a substantive way. So I am really curious to how Democrats are going to get involved in this conversation at all, especially when you have this narrative that's working to Republicans' favor, I think, right now, of being, Trump is the person that Netanyahu seems to, one of the few world leaders Netanyahu actually seems to listen to. And, his people were able to execute a lot of pretty instrumental things right off the bat that had eluded the Biden administration over the past year and a half.
All right, here we go.
And I realize that was not a satisfactory answer. I'm
it's
sorry.
not. That's a landmine. We're gonna say it on camera. All right, Robbie. Open the floor.
Hi, my name is Dev Browett.
Oh, Deb, sorry.
I'm a senior government major. My question's about how, we've heard so much about Elon Musk in recent days. My question is about the other White House surrogates, J.D. Vance, Vice President Vance, and even with the Trump administration having this quid pro quo, essentially with Eric Adams deputizing maybe him too. How is the White House planning to use these other people? Vice President Vance, we didn't really hear about until that Munich security conference you mentioned. What can we expect, and should we be worried about what they're doing?
It's so funny. You guys are really asking great questions. These are like all the questions my editors asked us yesterday in our editorial meeting that we've been working through. But the common phrase that keeps coming up with some of these higher profile surrogates like J.D. Vance, Pete Hegseth, the Department of Defense Secretary, Elon Musk, is that they're very helpful heat shields for Trump. And I think we are maybe seeing the early signs of a strategy that Trump will utilize them as sort of the bad cops, the people who are going to carry out the more the politically unpopular positions that he campaigned on, which I guess inherently make them sort of popular because they were mainstream, but difficult policy positions to execute, things like pulling out of Ukraine. It was really notable to me that JD was the person, as was Pete Hegseth, that went to Europe this week and essentially put down these red lines about ending the war in Russia and Ukraine. Elon also is, from a domestic perspective, being the person who carries out the things domestically that Trump promised that are causing collateral damage, that are politically unpopular in some ways. His approval rating has been impacted over the last month since he started his Doge efforts. And it kind of insulates Trump in some way from taking the full blame for some of the chaos that you're seeing. And actually, it's really interesting. We're hearing like sort of early rumblings from agency officials, cabinet members, senior administration officials who are finding themselves on the back end of the backlash internally of some of Elon's moves. So, for now, I think we're in the first 100 days, right? So we're early on, but it's only a matter of time, I think, before there ends up being more internal division and tensions over the public-facing policies and what's actually happening behind closed doors.
And surprisingly, Marco Rubio not going, right? Because
Yeah.
he didn't attend. They said, oh, he has got a plane. Something's wrong with his
Yeah,
plane.
well, and actually something that's super interesting to me has been Rubio has basically inadvertently become the face of some of Trump's most controversial actions other than Doge in the last few weeks. And he is the cabinet member who was the least MAGA in 2016, ran against Trump at that point and has a long Google search history of anti-Trump comments and statements, and to now being the face of eliminating America's soft power around the world.
We have, up here, we have got a question in the back. I can't see who it is.
Hi, my name's Anavi. I am a sophomore, gov major. My question's more about the foreign policy side of the administration. So I think it's pretty obvious that coercive diplomacy is a favorite for Trump. He started off with the tariff threats for Mexico and Canada. Now he's doing a similar thing in the Middle East, threatening Sisi and King Abdullah on aid cuts in Egypt and Jordan. But I think there's also like a limit that you can use to coercion, because then it really just becomes the boy who cried wolf, They're empty words because the tariffs are postponed. So I think, how is the White House dealing with this environment, and perhaps changes to foreign policy, because there's only a limited number of times you can really use coercive diplomacy. And I think leaders will also know that, yes, these are just empty threats at one point in time. So how is that change being reflected in the White House?
Yeah, you're totally right. It's an all stick, no carrot approach right now. And it does feel like there's only so many times you can get away with that before then, as we saw with Canada and Mexico, then backtracking on your word. And then also seeing sort of the economic repercussions, right? And that is something actually I think is going to be an important backstop in Trump's foreign policy, and especially his economic and international foreign policy, international economic policy. Once things start impacting Wall Street or having maybe potential inflationary effects, as some economists have surmised that the tariffs will, because they'll just ultimately raise prices for Americans at the end of the day. And when CEOs start complaining about it, that's when that will be, I think, one of the most effective checks on Trump. That's something I feel like a lot of people in Washington are hyper aware of. Headlines and outrage and public protests might not have an impact, but if you have the business roundtable, revolting against someone that the business community really through their, and now even Silicon Valley has thrown their weight behind, that's when you're going to start to see it potentially rein in some of Trump's actions. But I'm not sure we're there yet. But I will say that that episode that just happened a few weeks ago with pulling back on tariffs wasn't one that I think was particularly well received internally.
Right, let's go here, Wilson. Oh, here comes Aubrey on her way.
Thank you. My name is Wilson. Something that I think we've all heard is that, like the old Republican Party is dead, and I think we can pretty much all agree to that. Trump's pretty much throttled the old Republican Party, and we've also heard a lot that there are these new news sources that are almost caricatures of different ideas. Think about how like Breitbart is in the newsroom now, and these are narratives that are being pushed by legacy media, mainstream media. Do you see, if it's true that the old Republican Party has been throttled, the need for mainstream media outlets to include the sympathetic Trump voice in their newsrooms, or is it somewhat of a gamble that the Trump moment will pass? And if that is the gamble that mainstream media is willing to make, is it not them that birthed these caricature news outlets like Breitbart?
Well, I think, at the Post, do you mean hiring like a pro-Trump voice for an op-ed team?
I mean someone who's not like a never-Trumper, who's like, they're probably wrong for calling him a fascist, if I hate all he's doing, and then everything else following to the left of that.
Yeah, well, so in terms of our hiring process, we go out of our way to make sure that we're not hiring anyone with any sort of ideological leanings. Of course, everyone has some sort of like inherent belief system or value system, but we would not, Bertha, we would not, that isn't something that we would take into consideration with our hiring process. I do think, though, there are a lot of media outlets, though, now that are founded on the basis of filling a certain lane and having a certain leaning. And you have seen even Fox News kind of evolve to be more in line with the Trump Republican Party and move away from, traditional movement conservatives. But it's interesting because when you talk to some of these people, they do go out of their way to say to you, you're characterizing me incorrectly. I'm a movement conservative. I was here before MAGA. Like, there are some people do try to, preserve their ideological underpinnings. But at Fox, this has been a really interesting point of contention, just even in the Murdoch family, as they debate sort of the future of Fox and their succession plan. There's an incredible deep dive in the New York Times that was published this week. That's like essentially a book that documents the court battle that's emerged between the family members. But one of the big issues post 2016 was, do we move Fox more in the direction of Trump, or do we maintain our traditional conservative imprint? And like, what is the future of the Republican Party and the future of conservatism? And what we've seen happen is a lot more pro-Trump voices take on Fox News than, you don't see Mitt Romney hosting a show or Liz Cheney hosting a show on Fox. But in terms of what we do at the Post and what print legacy organizations do, that is, I think, always going to remain the same, and people are always going to try to be purists about that and the composition of the reporters who are doing that work.
All right, I know I saw a bunch in the middle. I don't know your name in the back with the green shirt, but let's go there.
Hi, my name's Henry. I'm a senior from Denver, Colorado, and a government major here. And going back a little bit to the beginning, I know it's not the most, maybe the biggest issue facing the country right now, but the Gulf of Mexico thing has definitely caused like a media frenzy and social media, mainstream media. And to a lot of people, it's like, oh, this is just, kind of a political showing for Trump's base, or to some people, like there's substance behind names. And obviously there was the whole Associated Press issue with them getting barred. But I mean, now it's been about like 10 years of Trump kind of playing the media ultimately to his advantage. So how do you, as a journalist, kind of still show the smoke and mirrors, navigate through that, but still get to like the substantive actions of this administration?
Yeah, I mean, that is like one of our mantras, right? There are lots of bright, shiny objects, and part of the political strategy here is a media strategy to flood the zone, make it such that you can pull off so many extreme and dramatic and potentially controversial things at once that it's hard for anyone to stay focused on one certain thing. So I think that has been, I think you totally nailed it. Like the Gulf of America is one of those bright, shiny objects that I think the Trump administration would rather have the consumer or voter or base voter focused on. It's red meat for some people, it's outrage for others, but it's a distraction from some of the more serious, substantive, harder to pull off things to do that are currently in action right now. And I think it's also why you haven't seen media try to take a really aggressive stance towards responding to them. Of course, we all support the Associated Press and, again, want to protect the First Amendment, but there hasn't been sort of a very reactive response to it. I think we're all trying to be thoughtful about it, because at the end of the day, what is most important is being able to have some legacy media outlet, some nonpartisan voice, being able to maintain access in the room to shout those hard questions at Trump in the Oval Office, or at a pool spray, or at some press conference. So it's tricky. It's tricky.
So super quick, if you're writing a story, are you going to call it Gulf of America or Gulf of Mexico?
Washington Post style is Gulf of Mexico.
All right, there you go. All right, what about over here? I want to make sure. Eric.
Hi, thanks for coming out. I'm curious how much you think Trumpism is an enduring and lasting coalition, or how much of it is Trump himself. And when I say that, I mean, like, for example, could you envision a scenario where J.D. Vance in 2028 takes the helm of the Republican Party and wins, or J.D. Vance-like figure, or can we also see another shift coming 4 years from now?
No, I think J.D. Vance 2028 conversations are already happening. I mean, during the transition, there were a bunch of fundraisers at Mar-a-Lago that sources had told me about, where Vance was raising a lot of money. I think that he's also sort of, in part, really responsible for wrangling a lot of these tech supporters and Silicon Valley backing, and kind of, he's had a really big cultural impact in that way. Someone described it to me as sort of counter culture. Basically, counter culture was when, sort of like leftist liberals, anti-war activists really made their way in through American institutions into the mainstream. And what is happening now, at least in terms of like the vision for Trump's Republican Party, is to kind of counter that and getting, MAGA cemented into American institutions. And I think Vance has had a really large part in that. He's also, he's someone who comes from Silicon Valley, Yale educated, wrote a book, worked with Ron Howard, has these like pretty incredible credentials, and then took all of that and, ran for Congress, won his Senate seat, and also was simultaneously able to speak the populist MAGA language and be a really effective communicator. So I am not in the business of predictions, but I would say J.D. Vance 2028 carrying the Trump mantle does not feel like out of the realm by any means.
All right here in the front row.
Thank you. My name is Lami, and I'm a freshman majoring in government and philosophy. So my question's still regarding Gaza. We know that in your recent report that you described as looking at this entire situation from like a real estate manager like view. And we know that like it sounds absurd, like his plan just sounds absurd, but Netanyahu was really pleased with what he proposed. And then recently he also like places sanctions on ICC. So like what do you think this is gonna like happen? Like what's the implication of his actions?
Yeah, well, one of the reasons why Netanyahu was so thrilled is because Trump essentially took the biggest problem that he's facing, not just in terms of like a policy problem, but the biggest political problem he has right now, and took it off his plate. So Netanyahu went home from his visit with Trump feeling like, Trump had sort of relieved him of a huge rebuilding moment that he faces at this point in time. And we also reported after the fact that a bunch of Trump advisors were completely shocked and surprised by Trump's sort of spitballing an announcement that it was discussed with Netanyahu prior to that press conference, but it wasn't widely socialized or circulated amongst top advisors. We had one person tell us that a few senior Trump administration officials basically spent the next 24 hours receiving incoming calls from Egypt to the Saudi Arabians, Jordanians, all freaking out about what Trump had promised. And Trump advisors in turn had to sort of spend time assuaging them, telling them that they would figure it out and try to roll it back. But I do think Trump has this uncanny ability to make really unorthodox promises and declarations that ultimately do materialize in one way or the other. One person told us that the reason why he also spit out that idea about the Riviera was because he's been so frustrated that there hasn't been any sort of real resolution, that it does seem like an intractable problem, and sort of this was his response to that. And actually I talked to a Biden administration official who actually said that it's not, moving the Palestinians during the rebuild is something that Democrats have privately discussed. It's not the most far-fetched idea because it is going to be such a difficult process and also an unhealthy process. The amount of debris and waste and pollution and air quality, just very basic things, lack of infrastructure. And this Biden administration official actually said that what Jared Kushner had written as part of a business proposal years ago was moving them to the Negev, the desert, temporarily, and then moving the Palestinians back, that it wasn't the craziest idea. But Trump, of course, as he usually tends to do, took that a step further to a more far-fetched business or hospitality-oriented idea.
All right, so we have about 5 minutes left. Let's see how many hands. Let's see. Oh, there's a hand in the back and Serena here. Okay, let's see if we can let's do boom, boom, back to back.
Yeah, I'll speed it up too,
And then-
sorry.
and then
I'm a little long-winded.
So Serena, and then is that Tommy? That's Tommy. Tommy's got a mustache now. All right, Serena, there you go. All right.
Hi, I'm Serena. I'm a senior. In contrast to the first Trump administration, this one seems to be running like a well-oiled machine. As somebody on the ground in the White House every day, how long do you think this is going to last? Is the Project 2025 groundwork something that's only going to last through the first 100 days? Or do you think this cohesion and the flood the zone strategy is something we should expect for the next 4 years?
All right, and then Tommy, what do you got?
You mentioned that Doge is going to be expected any day at the Pentagon, or at least that's how they feel. I
Yeah.
think they proposed an 8% cut with a conflict of interest of Elon Musk owning his own defense contracting company. What do you think Pentagon reform is going to look like? Do you think that Pete is going to work on the same side as Elon, being so vocally against defense contracting and cost plus contracting? Or do you think there might be friction there?
So that was a conversation that I was just having with a Trump official last night. I do think it's only a matter of time before there is this strategy right now at the White House implemented by the Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, to try to centralize power. She has 3 deputies, and everything is essentially supposed to run through her and run through that process. But I do think that is and that was the strategy that they utilized during the campaign that they found to be very effective in trying to rein in some of Trump's worst impulses. I do think that's going to be less successful this time around and maybe implode in some way, especially with all of these outside entities and these other people that Trump has delegated to really big policy responsibilities, that there's inevitably going to be some blow up. I mean, that's why process exists in the administration. It's deliberately slow at times so that that a government as a whole can reach a consensus and make a decision in a way that takes into consideration a lot of different competing interests and factions, and then that spits out something that's representative of that. And so when you have a process that's moving so quickly, it's like, it's the Silicon Valley saying, move fast and break things. That's what's going to happen. You are a reader or push alert, something. My colleague John broke that story. I've actually been really surprised that there hasn't been more tension already between the hardcore MAGA forces who are these, who are wary of techno-feudalism and want to cut Pentagon and defense spending. There hasn't been more backlash against Elon Musk yet. So I'm really curious how it's going to play out and how they're going to go through line by line, how they got to the 8% number. I don't think we have a lot of clarity into why they landed at 8%. I think that there is a desire to, because Musk is so close with Trump, to stay on Musk's good side, but we'll see how that budgeting process goes.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jackie, for coming all the way up north and joining us and giving all of your wonderful insight. Thank you, Cameron. Thank you to all the students. We have another amazing event next Wednesday. You have the flyer right there on your table, so you should just click that QR code right now to start RSVPing like maniacs. Because I think they're talking about billionaires, and clearly you guys care
Who's
about
coming?
Billionaires. It's Tyler. Tyler Austin Harper. Yeah. So we'll see you next Wednesday, right? All right, guys. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.